Well, this one took me a little longer than I thought it was going to, but we did it. What's going on, guys? This is Arkadin. Today we're going to be talking about floor number 106. All in all, an easier floor than 105, however, took me way longer than it should have, specifically because I tried so many different things, hoping to find better combinations than using Tamarinne for this particular one. Turns out, there's nothing that worked out quite as well, and I'll explain kind of why I decided to go with the composition that we did here. But if you look at the statistics of this floor when you jump in, you'll notice what's kind of crazy is there's like two compositions that have about a 10% like completion rate, and then a whole bunch of the rest of them that follow suit afterwards that actually are at like 1 to 2%. So are there other ways to be able to beat this floor? Yes. Are they necessarily as easy or as consistent? Probably not. So let me explain what this composition looks like, and we'll jump into what other options you could use if you don't have one or two of the specific characters. So first up on the list is going to be Diene. I actually used these particular stats on her. As you can see, I have a lot of just PvE gear. Nothing is 90'd on her. She's not horribly fast. She's not super tanky. She's not really too much of anything. She's very, very mediocre across the board. The only molas that I had for her were basically enough to get rid of turn cooldown on the S2 and the S3, and we did actually use Rod for extra healing on her. Diene is super important for this particular one because as the boss goes, and we'll explain this as we go further, you actually have to have 2 buffs up at any given time to be able to attack the final boss. So Diene having not just 2 buffs on her S3, but also being able to reduce cooldown if you burn that so that you can actually do it every other turn is amazing. And then also on the S2, having a third essential buff through the shielding made her the obvious choice for this. We don't necessarily have Diene coming up anytime horribly soon for everybody, but it is November when we're putting this video out, and so it's possible that she comes back in December because she has been around several times. But all in all, I would say she is one of the ones that if you can get away with not having anything, she's one of the least likely you can. She's very, very good and has a lot of uniquely good buffs to bring here. Next up on the list was Tamarinne. Just as you see as well, all PvE gear again. We didn't even have a plus 30 Wonders Potion Vial. I really should finish that up because having 100% on that is so good. But it was enough. Does help to get rid of a lot of those debuffs that are initially coming in. She's incredible as she always is. Gets rid of debuffs on her S3 proc. Is able to combat readiness push with the S2. Gives a buff with the attack buff. Also being able to get forced to dual attacks on the S1 is problematic in this fight, but also incredible in this fight, depending on what phase of the fight that you're in, as well as the reality that it also does strip off buffs off of the boss. So all in all, Tamarinne, super solid choice for this one. Make sure that you have her as well. She just complements this super well and goes really well with the next character we're going to talk about, which is Iseria, who initially you would think, oh, that's a kind of a duh person to go along with Tamarinne, but in this fight, it's actually a little weird. So when you use her S2 to be able to reset cooldowns, we'll talk about how this works in the fight in a second, but when you're using that S2 to reset cooldowns, you can actually line up Tam and Iseria in a really unique way that makes it so that Tam's S2, S1 when in idle form is actually working for you and not against you in phase 1. So we'll talk about that here in a second. So really great character for the resets. Has a defense break on the S3, defense break on the S1, has a strip that also is useful. Like as we said with Tamarinne having the strip on the S1, she also has one with her S3. So if one misses, you at least have a chance to be able to land some extra, as well as just, again, defense break, which is super huge. Note to self, everything on this character that I'm showing you right now is correct, except for the Song of Stars. Do not use Song of Stars. I would definitely suggest a Daydream Joker for extra damage here. I would probably not use anything like Rosa Hargana because ultimately Rosa Hargana is going to give you more dual attacks, and with Tamarinne being in kind of a weird position where if she AoEs as on her S1 with the beginning, it's a nightmare. Don't do that. You really don't want extra dual attacks happening here as much as you would in other floors, so just keep that in mind. But the biggest reason you don't want Song of Stars is when you actually use the S3 on Luluca in the final phase, if all 3 debuffs land, aka the target from the Song of Stars and the defense break and the unbuffable, then all 3 of them will just disappear off the boss, because if you have more than 2 debuffs on the final boss, they actually don't stick. So you really don't want this. It's better to have the extra damage. So I suggest Daydream Joker, at which point making Iseria Tamarinne, and Diene like the perfect combination for movement in this particular floor. So finally, moving into the damage dealer part of the fight, I would say that there are a couple that just are far superior than others. Arbiter Vildred is one of them for his ability that if he dies, cool, he's going to come back, and that's ultimately potentially a win in the sense that he won't have his buffs back up on him, but hey, maybe it'll show up clutch right in the right time, or you can hit some ads or whatever. All in all, if he dies, he's not perma-dead. That's super, super nice. Also, the bigger thing, I think, is that he hits 2 targets at a time with his S1. That's kind of a big deal. I would say that the 3 best players and best characters that can be utilized as your damage dealers for this particular fight to go along with your initial 3 are going to be Arbiter Vildred, Spectre Tenebria, and Champion Zerato. Champion Zerato and Spectre Tenebria, I didn't go with, and the main reason why is because A, I don't have Spectre Tenebria, unfortunately, which is super the worst. But also, my Champ Zerato, once we ended up like sending them back in and like trading them out, I kept a CZ, but I did not actually keep the Molas in him. So I would say he's going to do much better having 100% on his S2. So having that fully mullet as well as more damage on that S1 is going to be super, super necessary. I decided to go with Arbiter Vildred. Arbiter Vildred was already plus 15. He also does similar things where he's hitting 2 targets back. All 3 of those that I mentioned also hit 2 targets, which is very, very nice because you want to be able to land some inevitable damage on the extra adds when you're in the final phase. It's just super, super helpful, especially if you have to like take a second, not hit the boss, and kind of focus on killing an ad. Dealing with 2 ads as opposed to 3 is always going to be a benefit. So having that as an extra option is very, very nice. For the artifact on Arbiter Vildred, I would make sure to use a Daydream Joker just like you would on Iseria. And the main reason is that, again, the buffs are kind of nice here, but you actually have the ability to use DDJ, and that's only going to increase your damage on AoE. You're also hitting 2 targets at a time, so you're getting a lot of extra damage constantly. That's going to be much more consistent than trying to hope for greater procs, as well as just across the board. Just percentage damage is always going to be good against big bosses here. The only other final thing that I would suggest for this fight is to make sure that you use Arky as your guardian, because again, we talked about buffs and we'll talk a little bit more about them here in the fight, but Arky does offer a critical chance buff that is not actually the same critical chance buff that like CDOM puts up. So they actually stack. It's kind of gross. You need the things, not because you need the extra crit chance, but literally because you need the buffs before you can attack. So now that we've kind of talked through the reality of these are the types of characters that you should be bringing in here, let's jump into the fight and I'll kind of explain each individual phase as we go through it. So as we jump into phase 1 of this fight, you're going to notice that you have the Grief Harvester Mera as the main ad, as well as 3 other mobs. Now, 2 of them are the Deceitful Roplas, and the other one is called a Decaying Neuropal. And the Decaying Neuropal is going to be the thing that you need to kill first. It does start with a defense buff, and that can be a little bit frustrating, especially if it doesn't strip. So right off the bat, you're going to want to make sure that your Iseria does actually reset the Tamarinne with the S2, and then immediately S3 the Decaying Neuropal to get rid of A, the defense buff, but B, hopefully to get a defense break. If it was me, I restarted the fight if we didn't get that right off the bat, just because it speeds up the fight pretty significantly, just to make sure that you're able to kill him pretty quickly, for a couple different reasons, but the biggest reason being the S1 attacks the enemy with a shockwave with a 25% chance to stun for 1 turn. Stuns are annoying. Thankfully, you do have Wondrous Potion Vial here to be able to get rid of some of that as it goes. And then also, the S3 every couple of turns here repeatedly fires a shockwave at all enemies with a 75% chance to decrease speed for 2 turns. Damage dealt increased proportional to the caster's lost health. So the damage on that S3, you really need this thing dead quickly, because every time that it gets lower, it's going to feel like it hits even harder. So that S3 is very, very annoying. Try and kill that guy ASAP. Now, for the Deceitful Roplas, I didn't really notice as much of it. It didn't seem like as big of a deal. They'll put bleeds on you. They'll hit you with Vampiric Touch and decrease defense as well with their S3. If you're using not Arbiter Vildred, but actually Champion Zerato, it's disgusting when he puts this back on them. It's super frustrating. For them, not for you. It's actually amazing on your side, because now you got defense break without even having to try, as well as you're actually gaining some health back every single time that you're hitting them. So, to be honest, the Deceitful Ropals aren't too big of a deal. The biggest thing to deal with here is going to be the Grief Harvester Mera. So, one of the passives makes it so that after suffering an attack that targets all allies, it decreases skill cooldown of all allies by 2 turns and increases combat readiness by 50%. So basically, she already has like 4 turns to be able to get all the way to a full S3 on the Grief Harvester, and that S3 actually attacks all enemies by looping infinite dimensions, dispelling all buffs with a 50% chance to decrease defense for 2 turns before stunning a random enemy for 1 turn. So one of your people gets stunned, chance to get all of them with a decreased defense, and it dispels all of the buffs off. So being that you have a very buff heavy team, you really don't want to be buffing right before that S3 is going to go off. So just keep that in mind. If it's Diene's turn, you're okay with maybe using the S2 because it will actually hit the shield before it strips it. So you can actually stunt that damage right off the bat, and then it'll strip the shield after the shield's gotten hit. So the shield is nice. The one that gives buffs on the S3, not quite as good. So this particular phase is interesting. It's always a habit of mine, usually when I'm playing with Iseria, to just start cycling players by using the S2 in idle form on Tamarinne. For this particular fight, you really don't want to do that. And so what I've done that I think works pretty well for this particular phase is make sure that you reset the TAM with the Iseria right off the bat, and then just continue to S1 and S2. Don't S3, don't idle form at all until you know that the S2 is back up on Iseria. Also, even knowing that the S2 is back up on Iseria, make sure that the Grief Harvester has at least 3 out of 4 of the hits towards getting to, like, of the turns basically before her S3 is up, before you even transform. And the reason I say that is because if she's at 3, that means that she's not going to immediately use her S3, but then you can actually use the S3 on Tam, use an S2, boost everybody forward, take all the damage. You'll actually be able to, as soon as it's Iseria's turn, you'll be able to reset Tam again, which will reset her idle form number 1, but more importantly, it will also reset her S2 you just used. You S2 again, you can lap them and loop them around a second time, and then the boss will already be at the point where it's going to use its S3 anyways, so pushing it forward doesn't matter. Now you S1 with an AoE attack, which ultimately will push the boss, but you knew that was going to happen anyways, and that way you're not forcing that phase over and over and over too many times. Keep that in mind. It was very, very, very useful moving forward in this. And by the time I was actually like making those kinds of like ramp ups happen, it made it so that like even if I finished phase 1 not perfectly, I was always in a good rotation with the Tam Iseria, and it made it so that by the time we were done with phase 1, we had a full bar of souls. You do want to make sure that when you're done with this phase that you have a full bar of souls. You're going to want all of their abilities up if possible to the best of your ability, and then just be ready to attack in the next phase, and we'll talk about that here in a second. One other quick mention for the Grief Harvester Mera is once the boss actually hits 40%, it will actually dispel all of the debuffs off of it and get an ability called Rampage, which is when the caster suffers a critical hit, it has a 25% chance to grant the caster an extra turn. These turns just count towards getting her towards the S3. So hopefully you don't get super unlucky and it just like insta boosts every single time you hit her. But I mean, you don't really have a way to stop a lot of these crits coming through. So it just is kind of what it is there. It's just what you deal with. So if you know that if you're about to defense break or do something that's going to make this phase move a little faster, make sure that you do that either way before 40% or wait until after 40%, use it after that, so that way you can force the rest of the phase down quickly. So once we enter into phase 2, you'll notice I don't have a really great transition here as far as it goes. I have some debuffs on me. I definitely have a lot of damage that has been dealt to me right before we start. It's really okay because you've kind of saved Tamarinne's S3 to give you a bunch of heals and a bunch of lapping forward. You also have a lot of buffs that you're going to be adding with Diene, which as long as she's on Rod is going to give you a lot of that health back. So really, because you've been saving it, it's okay if you transition a little bit weird here. Things to note that you will be seeing. There will be Luluca, who is the main boss to take down here, as well as 3 Night Seeds. So these Night Seeds actually are kind of interesting. Upon death, they will grant all enemies a random buff for 3 turns. So if you're killing them, you're actually going to be getting buffs. That's huge in this fight, mostly due to the passive on Luluca that basically makes it so that if you don't have 2 buffs and you hit the boss, she will actually do an AoE version of Luluca's S1, which then defense breaks everybody and it cannot be counterattacked. So that's why a lot of people might think like, oh, I'll bring a counterattack unit here. You really can't. You're just going to take a lot of damage. So you really, really, really don't want to hit her. You'll notice at the beginning of this fight, I actually have to hit with Arby. I was praying that we didn't hit the boss. We actually didn't hit the boss. So every once in a while on some of these attempts we did, and it was just like, all right, GG, we try again. Very unfortunate and like on the timing there, but you don't want to hit the boss until you have 2 buffs up. So these Night Seeds help with that if you're killing them. Their S1s attack the enemy with the power of the moon with a 70% chance to decrease hit chance for 2 turns and increase an ally's combat readiness by 15%. So yeah, I mean, they put some debuffs on you. It's a little bit frustrating. And of course, a hit debuff is actually a really big deal, especially when you're trying to strip off the immunity and stuff with somebody like Iseria on the boss, or even honestly for just making sure that your damage lands with Arby. Decreased hit chance actually is a big deal. Also on their S3, which this is where it gets really kind of hard to deal with, is their S3s on these ones dispels 1 buff from all enemies before transferring 1 debuff from the caster to all enemies. Grants the ally with the lowest health a skill nullifier once. So skill nulls start getting tossed around, which is very, very frustrating and very hard to deal with. Also, you're going to see that obviously they're getting rid of buffs on you. You really can't afford for that to a degree, which is why a lot of what you're going to do with your souls in this phase is burning to make sure that Diene always has the ability to keep her 2 buffs up constantly. If you're burning with her and burning every once in a while when you know that you can with like Iseria to make sure you land that defense break, which is super nice, and that's a cheaper one too. You don't really need to burn on Arby. You don't really need to burn on Tamarinne at all. In fact, I would say most of the time you probably won't have to, but you'll be cycling enough between the S2s resetting the Tamarinne to keep cycling your characters around to take turns. So let's talk about the boss and how this actually interacts with the boss. So Luluca, again, you need to make sure that you have buffs up on yourself at all times before you attack her. She has the ability to strip some souls. There's a lot kind of that goes on with that when it comes down. The big passive for her is Rekos Oracle, which is at the end of the turn, grants all allies stackable increased attack and speed and grants the caster immunity for 1 turn. So she always has immunity every time she's taking a turn, which is very, very unfortunate. However, the unbuffable debuff that you can put up with Iseria actually stops the immunity from coming back for those couple of turns, which is amazing. So that's, I mean, Iseria was a big MVP against her for sure. Also, when the caster is buffed at the start of someone's turn, dispels the same buff from all enemies. So keep this in mind too. This gets really dangerous as the fight goes on, because if you're not stripping off these debuffs off of Luluca, you end up actually not being able to buff with the same one. So if she puts up speed buff, as much as that one doesn't really affect my team, it makes her faster. That's a big deal. I can't have her going too much faster, otherwise I never actually get the turns I need, and she will just continue to cycle everybody too fast. You want her stripped is the basic gist. Make sure she's getting stripped constantly, and be ready to have a strip up, whether that's Tam's S3 or Iseria's S3 when she hits 50%. Because at 50%, she will activate Rekos Blessing, which is the one that actually cleanses off all of the debuffs on herself. And also, it will actually change one of the Night Seeds into a Rahel of Darkness, which is basically the dark boss that you farm when you're trying to get the Spirit Altar things. All in all, that part gets really frustrating, because when that shows up at the next phase, that has the ability to not only strip buffs off of your players, it also starts at S3 ready, and when it does that S3, hits a lot of targets and also has the ability to put up an unbuffable on you. So there's a lot of reasons why once you hit 50%, you really want to be able to burn this boss down ASAP. So keep in mind that when the S2 is used on Luluca, it summons up 3 Night Seeds. It dispels all debuffs from all allies before granting a random buff for 3 turns. So that's where she's going to buff herself. She's also, if you kill one of the adds, she will actually respawn that add. And then also the Night Seeds will be kind of dealt with from there. Think about this, is once you're at 50%, that actually will just like reset the cooldown, and the Rekos Blessing will happen anyway. So just keep that in mind if you're like just again about to be to 50% and you're about to debuff with the defense break. Maybe wait a turn or do what you can to like force that to happen. You do have Daydream Joker on 2 characters with this team, so being able to like get that last 5 or 10% can happen in one rotation due to the way this works. Also keep in mind if you're running low on buffs, the Archie as well is incredible here. The Archie does good damage to all the ads. The Archie does good damage to Luluca as well. So Archie is not just a random buffer, but also a solid source of damage if you have the souls to be able to manage it. So keep that in mind. It's going to be Archies. It's going to be rerunning the S3 constantly on the Diene. And assuming that all of the things line up the way that you need them to, Luluca actually dies relatively easily. Where it gets a little random is when she puts up buffs that happen to also coincide with the same buffs you do, and then you kind of run into a weird phase where you accidentally just don't have the ability to put up 2 buffs that she doesn't already have on herself, and then you're kind of screwed. That does happen, and you may have to reset, but for the most part, you have a good quality amount of buffs here. You have a lot of turn cycling with the Tam in the second phase, because now you can just unload with Tam and you're good to go. So as between that and all the damage you can do with the Arby and the Iseria, this phase is either done in like 2 to 3 minutes, or it's won in like 4 to 5 minutes. So keep that in mind, and that's basically this fight. So there it is, guys. 106 is in the bag. We are going to be moving on to 107 here later this week. So excited to jump into another one. I'll be honest. Again, we talk about the RNG of these floors. There is just a lot of layers that can be very frustrating in this. So I hope that these videos are sort of starting to peel back those layers of RNG and make it more palatable, more tangible for you guys to actually be able to jump through these hoops. So love you guys. Appreciate you a ton. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe if this is the content that you're all about, because I know I enjoy doing it for you guys, and I enjoy just having you guys around. So it's good stuff. We will see you in the next video. Peace, guys.